Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is The Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for a summary of A Song of Ice and Fire. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're starting a brand new series of videos where we take a look at each of the previously released books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series as we summarize the events that have happened thus far and catch us up to the present time of where we are now at the end of A Dance with Dragons. Now, I know I'm probably going to get a few comments down below that are going to be like, Advocate, this is a waste of time. Why bother summarizing this incomplete series? The Winds of Winter is never coming out. You're a damn fool. And to that I say, yeah, you're probably right. The Winds of Winter probably has a 10% chance at best of being released within the near future, but I choose to believe that one day it will be released. And why not, have a couple of videos to help summarize and refresh your memory of events that have happened prior to the release of that long forsaken, long fabled, never before released book. And even if it never does see the light of day, well, at least you have a couple of videos to refresh your memory on how wonderful this series is. So for those of you who need a refresher on all the events that have happened thus far in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, or for those of you who have never read the books but have watched the Game of Thrones TV show and want to know how the books differentiate themselves from the TV show, or for those of you who have no intention on reading the books or watching the TV show but just want to know what happens within the series, then these videos are for you. And we're going to start this party off by going out into the field and taking a look at the book that started out this entire magnum opus we've come to know and love, A Game of Thrones. So I've got here a map of Westeros and Essos, the two continents that are the predominant setting for this book series. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take a look at our characters here within the book series, at least within this first book, and see how they kind of move and migrate around this world map as we kind of narrate the events that happen within this first book. So hold on to your butts, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the summary of A Game of Thrones. So for those of you who are brand new and have no idea what this series is even about, the Game of Thrones series, or A Song of Ice and Fire, if you're a book purist like myself, predominantly follows a couple of families within this giant world, predominantly the continent of Westeros. This world consists of kings and queens and high lords and rulers and just all sorts of medieval European goodness mixed in with a little bit of fantasy, because we actually have a fantastical element within this series known as the Others, who function as the kind of chaotic evil within this series. They're just essentially a bunch of mythical ice zombies that, as of the beginning of A Game of Thrones, predominantly exist in small numbers here north of the Wall, but as the series goes on, they will go ahead and maybe grow their numbers and potentially, we haven't gotten to that point in the series yet, but potentially move south of the Wall and maybe take care of a few things down here in Westeros. Oh, by the way, if it wasn't already obvious, this video and these series of videos will contain full series spoilers. So if you have not read the books and don't want to be spoiled, or have not watched the show and don't want to be spoiled, then these videos are not for you. But again, if you need a refresher, then this will be a spoilerific summary of the first book of what I intend to be a spoilerific summary of the first 5 books. So yeah, let's get to it. So yeah, the predominant characters that happen to kind of populate this book, in particular this book series, consist of this family. There we go. By the way, this summary is completely based off of my memory, so if I get a few things wrong, feel free to constructively, please, let me know down in the comment section if I get a few things wrong, and maybe just correct me, but please politely correct me. And if not, you can impolitely correct me. I'll just probably, be like, hey man, please be nice. So this book in particular predominantly follows this family called the Stark family, and they are a family that live in this northern town of Westeros called Winterfell, a relatively cold, I think of like a northern Scottish town when I think of Winterfell, obviously with the giant castle there being in the foreground. And the predominant characters that live in this town of Winterfell consist of a High Lord named Eddard Stark. He's our main character who will follow for about 60% of this first book. His wife, Catelyn Stark, Eddard Stark. He's a good nobleman. He's a good guy. I love this man. He's kind of your standard stereotypical fantasy protagonist, but he's a good dude, and you want to see him succeed. His wife, Catelyn Stark, who's a very worried mother of her children. You have their children, Robb Stark, who's the eldest son. He's a 15-year-old boy who's learning the ways of how to rule the land of Winterfell. The eldest daughter, Sansa Stark, who's a little bit naive, but a kind of your prototypical example of what a High Lord lady is supposed to be like, a lady of Winterfell. You have her younger sister, Arya Stark, a 9-year-old rambunctious girl who loves going against the grain and kind of has all these kind of just anti-feminine things going on for her, where she she goes against the grain, much to the chagrin of her parents. Bran Stark, he's a 7-year-old boy who likes to climb, and he's a boy. He's just a 7-year-old boy. I'm not gonna lie, guys, out of all the characters in this series, Bran Stark is probably my least favorite. He's probably the least interesting character to follow. He's just kind of a boy who does 7-year-old boy things, I guess. And the youngest son, Rickon Stark, he's a 4-year-old boy who probably has a lot less to do within the series, but he's a rambunctious boy who's a little bit of an aggressive boy, kind of throws a few temper tantrums here and there. A rambunctious little guy. And then you have, so Eddard Stark, despite being a man of honor, at some point he actually may have slept around because he fathered a bastard son named Jon Snow. Jon Snow is a 15-year-old, I believe he's 15 or 14. I think he's 14. 14-year-old bastard son of Eddard Stark, not from Catelyn, birthed by a mysterious mother. He's just kind of an angry teenager, wants to know who his mom is. Only Eddard Stark knows that secret, and he wants to know. He's a curious boy. He's a curious young lad. And then you have Theon Greyjoy, who is not a Stark, but actually someone who was raised within Winterfell for the past 10 years of his life. I believe he's 21 or 18, something like that. He's an older lad, and he was actually taken hostage from a different family who lives out here in the Iron Islands, called the Greyjoy family. And about 10 years prior to the events of the Game of Thrones, there was a giant war between the Iron Islands, who rebelled against the city of King, basically against all of Westeros, because they didn't want to be ruled by King Robert Baratheon, who we'll get to here in a bit. And essentially the Iron Islands lost that war because they're stupid. It's just, a couple of these islands fighting against this entire continent. Of course they're going to lose. So yeah, they got their asses handed to them, and as retribution, Eddard Stark decided to take Theon Greyjoy as his ward, his hostage, just to kind of, teach the Greyjoys a lesson. If they ever decide to rise up again, Eddard or whoever else may take one of their children and, raise them as their own. So Theon Greyjoy has been living here with the Starks for the past 10 years, and despite him not being a Stark, he's been raised relatively well by the Stark family. He's been loved and hugged and all the things that you should do with the son you love. So yeah, a couple of these characters we'll delve into as we delve further into this book summary. And apologies, this is taking a while. This first video is predominantly going to be a lot of introduction into kind of the lore, the land, the characters. The next couple of videos hopefully will be more streamlined as we are more in the know as to who these characters are. But as far as like the most important characters in this book series go, obviously we have the Starks and Theon Greyjoy, and then we have the characters right here in King's Landing, who King's Landing is, by the way, is kind of like the capital of Westeros. It's the capital city where the king lives. It's kind of a medieval European version of New York City, very seedy, very just kind of disgusting, overpopulated, but it's where a lot of people live, a lot of people make their commerce, and it's probably one of the places that makes the most money for Westeros. So within the city of King's Landing, we have our king and queen, King Robert Baratheon. He actually is a relatively new king. He came into the fold 15 years ago when he killed the son of the previous king called Aerys Targaryen, Mad King Aerys. The son was Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince-to-be. Robert Baratheon killed Rhaegar Targaryen, and it created a devastating kind of after effect within this war that they were fighting. The previous king, the Mad King Aerys, lost his heir. Nobody liked Mad King Aerys. everybody kind of rose up against him, and Aerys died in the war, so which we'll get to here in a bit. So now Robert Baratheon has been ruling since then. Robert Baratheon is the king of Westeros. His queen wife is Cersei Lannister. Oh, by the way, Robert Baratheon is just kind of he's a very interesting character. He's definitely the textbook example of kind of chauvinistic, macho, alcoholic narcissism. Well, maybe not narcissist. I don't know. The best way I can describe Robert is that he's a loud, brutish, drunk of a man who loves loud, brutish, drunken, manly things. And he loves sleeping around as well, as a lot of drunken, brutish, manly, toxic masculinity men like to do. So yeah, despite the fact that he's married to his queen wife, Cersei Lannister. Cersei Lannister, she's a bit of a cold woman. She's definitely quite a few expletives that I can think of. Very just cold, evil woman, but she's the queen. Her twin brother, Jaime Lannister, is he's on the Kingsguard. He wears a white cloak. 15 years ago, during the events of the previous king's death, Jaime Lannister is actually the person who thrust a sword through the chest of Mad King Aerys. So ever since then, Jaime Lannister has earned the infamous reputation of being called the Kingslayer. And then we have, so Cersei and Jaime are twins, and then they have a younger brother named Tyrion Lannister, who's one of my favorite characters in the series. A lot of people's favorite characters. He's a fan favorite. Just kind of this, he's similar to Robert Baratheon. He's a drunk, but unlike Robert Baratheon, he's a smart drunk. He's very witty, very kind of a smart ass, just all sorts of, he likes to read, he likes to make jokes, likes to quip around. He's definitely one of the most clever people in the series. I love this man. And anyway, Robert and Cersei have 3 children. The eldest son, who is the Prince Joffrey Baratheon, who is a very just kind of cold and very psychopathic, psychotic boy. The middle child, the eldest daughter, Myrcella Baratheon, who's just kind of a nice, sweet girl, and then the youngest, Tommen Baratheon, who's just a nice, sweet boy. So we have kind of one rotten egg within a batch of 3 eggs. And then we have kind of the council that lives within King's Landing that help King Robert Baratheon and Queen Cersei Lannister rule the realm. They are Grand Maester Pycelle. The Maester is someone who is an intellectual, lives within the castle, the Red Keep of King's Landing. Peter Baelish, also known as Littlefinger, he is a very smarmy, mischievous, and a mysterious man. Varys, who's also just as mysterious, almost as mischievous, but a little bit more on the nose in terms of his mischievous. Oh, well, a little more reduced in terms of how obviously mischievous he is. These both, Littlefinger and Varys, are schemers. We have someone else who's also on the Kingsguard. The Kingsguard consists of 7 of the king's appointed knights who help protect the king from any sort of danger. This one is Sir Barristan Selmy. He's the most famous Kingsguard within the 7 Kingsguard men. And then we have Renly Baratheon, who is Robert Baratheon's youngest brother. There is another brother named Stannis Baratheon, who gets name dropped a lot. He gets mentioned a lot. Stannis is also my favorite character within the entire series. However, despite the fact that Stannis is mentioned quite a bit within this book, he actually doesn't appear until the following book, the sequel to this first book, and that the second book being A Clash of Kings. So yeah, those are pretty much our characters that take residence within the continent of Westeros. And then we actually have, I know this is a lot of names to keep track of, a lot of characters to keep track of. I was just as lost as you potentially were, dear viewer, on my first read through of the series. But as you read these books, you start, kind of getting a grasp, like, okay, yes, Arya is this person, Ned is this person, Daenerys is this person. So you kind of start getting a grasp as to who is who, and it stops becoming so difficult to keep track of names. So yeah, over here on the continent of Essos, which is east of Westeros, Westeros, east Essos, you have a young blonde 13-year-old girl named Daenerys Targaryen. She is the daughter of the previous king, the king who died 15 years ago, Mad King Aerys. Mad King Aerys left behind, despite the fact that he lost his heir in Rhaegar Targaryen, he still had 2 other children that managed to survive the war and make their way off towards Essos. They are currently being secretly housed by a man known as Illyrio Mopatis. I do not have a portrait for Illyrio because I just wanted to keep the portraits of the most important characters within the series, but if there's any other characters that don't appear within the map, I'll make mention of their names. So they are being housed by Illyrio Monpontis. They include Daenerys Targaryen. She was Mad King Aerys' youngest daughter. She's 13 years old at the start of the book, and her elder brother Viserys Targaryen, who I think he's like 21 or maybe 18. Oh, gosh, I need to... Again, I'm basing this off of memory, so please feel free to correct me down in the comments section below. Viserys Targaryen, who's kind of just a cruel, kind of just a very snobby, cruel man. You don't like him. And then we have a couple of other, not minor characters, but not as major characters. Those being Jorah Mormont. He's just a man here in Essos, hanging around. We'll talk about him more later. And then Khal Drogo, we'll mention him once we get into the actual summary proper. So yeah, those are our characters. Sorry for the mouthful. I know this is probably going to be a long video, so bear with me, guys, as we summarize the events of A Game of Thrones. So those are our characters. Let's get this book started. So our book of A Game of Thrones begins here at a place called the Wall. The Wall essentially is this giant 700-foot snow structure that separates the continent of Westeros from pretty much the dangers that happen here in this Arctic northern region of Westeros. There's a lot of things here: the lands of always winter, the frozen shore, the haunted forest. So it is here where a man named Will, he sees the death of a few of his companions as they get essentially killed off by a couple of ice zombies, otherwise known as the Others. Now, the Others, within the context of the beginning of the Game of Thrones book, are these mysterious creatures that have been long fabled, but never like no one in Westeros really believes in them. It's kind of just like this, like, oh, it's just this urban legend, this myth, but they exist, they're real. And they kill quite a few of the Night's Watchmen that are with Will. He's part of the Night's Watch. Essentially, the Night's Watch are the people that man the wall, the people that serve as the first line of defense against the dangers that occur north of the wall. Predominantly wildlings being just human characters that happen to live north of the wall, but they're thousand years ago, their purpose was to protect Westeros from the Others. So Will and these band of watchmen, Night's Watchmen, they confront the Others, and they get killed, and Will is the only one who manages to escape. So Will manages to flee from his duty as a Night's Watchman and flee south of the Wall. Now, the reason why this is important is because when you take the black being the clothing that you wear when you're part of the Night's Watch, you swear an oath that you will forever be part of the Night's Watch. That is your life, that is your love, that is your duty. You cannot take a wife, you cannot take a family. The Night's Watch become your new family, and you are there for life. Like you cannot leave the Night's Watch. So the fact that Will abandons the Night's Watch is considered a crime that is punishable by death. So Will runs south of the Wall, and we actually begin our series proper with the introduction of our Stark family. Now, the book actually this first book follows 8 different point of view characters, which you read. Essentially you delve into the mindset of these 8 different POV characters as we narrate the events that happen within their line of sight. And 6 of the POV characters within the Game of Thrones are actually here within our Stark family. Eddard Stark, Catelyn Stark, those are 2 POV characters. Sansa, Arya, Bran, those are 3 others. And then Jon Snow serves as our 6th POV character here within this town of Winterfell. The other 2 POV characters are Tyrion Lannister, who is the youngest Lannister brother, and then Daenerys Targaryen, who's off in Essos. But anyway, when we begin the book proper, we begin with our very first POV character named Bran Stark. And he is here to observe the beheading of Will, who is the Night's Watchman that escaped from the Wall when he was trying to run away from the Others. And because he essentially ditched the Night's Watch, that is a crime punishable by death. So Eddard Stark carries out the sentence that, this man must die because this crime occurred within the North, within his lands. Eddard Stark has to carry the sentence. And the very first lesson that we learn within this book series is that, as Eddard Stark explains it, the man who orders the sentence has to be the one to carry it out. So because Eddard Stark says, hey, Will, sorry, your penalty for ditching the Night's Watch is death, because he is the one who produced this outcome, this result, or Will's kind of verdict for what he did, Eddard then has to be the one to carry out the sentence. So Eddard, or Ned Stark, grabs his giant sword made of Valyrian steel, this material that has long been fabled, that can easily cut through anything. Very sharp, definitely sharper than a butter knife. But what isn't these days? It's the sharpest type of metal you can have. So Eddard essentially carries out his giant ice sword and swipes through Will's neck as we say goodbye to Will. And Eddard Stark kills this man. So then Eddard Stark asks Bran, like, Bran, do you know why I had to do this? And Bran is like, no, why? And so Eddard explains that he who commits a sentence has to carry it out. So anyway, as we narrate the events that happen within the land of Winterfell, we're introduced to the family members who I just described earlier. And at one point, Catelyn tells Eddard, Ned Stark, that like, hey, the king Robert Baratheon, who was formerly your best friend all those years ago, because Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon were previously best friends before Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne, the seat of the king in King's Landing. And since then, their communication has been very sparse. It's like, oh, Robert Baratheon is on his way here north of Winterfell. Your other best friend or former protector in Jon Arryn, he was found dead. And so Eddard is like, oh no, like my friend and former protector Jon Arryn is dead. I'm really sad. And like, what the heck? Robert Baratheon is coming here unannounced. What the heck is this? So then further on into the story, we get to the point where Robert Baratheon, accompanied by his queen wife, Cersei Lannister, Jaime Lannister, Tyrion Lannister, and this entire crew of people, they travel. We don't narrate these events, but they travel from King's Landing to Winterfell, which is an adventure that takes about a month. Another thing you'll come to learn about travel within this series is that traveling between these different places takes a while, because these are large distances. Westeros is the size of an entire continent. There's no cars, there's no planes. This is a different alternate take on medieval Europe. Things take forever to travel by horse carriage from one place to another. So it takes them about a month to get to the land of Winterfell, and this is where everyone kind of gets to know each other. We're introduced to the Lannisters, we're introduced to Robert Baratheon, introduced to the Hound, Sandor Clegane, Joffrey, who is also on the... he's the protector of Joffrey Baratheon at this point, and yeah. So anyway, everyone's, getting to know each other, all sorts of mingling going on. And then Bran Stark, who likes to climb, he likes to climb things, climb furniture, climb castles. Doesn't every 7-year-old child like to climb castle walls and whatnot? He accidentally walks in on Cersei Lannister getting it on. But despite the fact that she is married to her, her king husband, Robert Baratheon, he actually catches her in the act of sleeping with her twin brother, Jaime Lannister. Oh ho ho, incestuous. Which is another thing we kind of, when you first read about it, you're like, what the heck is this? This is really gross. But as the series goes on, you kind of start getting used to all the incest that happens within this series. So Cersei Lannister and Jaime Lannister are getting it on, and Bran sees this, and Bran doesn't really know what's going on. He just sees two naked people kind of flopping about, having a good time, and so he doesn't know what he's seeing, but Cersei Lannister is worried that Bran might tell somebody who does know what may be happening here, because, ladies and gentlemen, an open secret, but Joffrey Baratheon, Myrcella Baratheon, and Tommen Baratheon are not exactly the children of Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister, but rather they're the children of Cersei and Jaime Lannister. Ho ho ho. Intriguing. So the reason this is potentially an issue is because if it ever comes to light that Joffrey Baratheon, who is the heir to the throne, is not the son of Robert Baratheon, but the son of someone who's not the king, then it essentially ruins his inheritance, his right to inherit the throne. And so then that inheritance would go to someone else, someone who's not a Lannister. And Cersei can't let that happen because Cersei wants a Lannister on the Iron Throne. So she tells Jaime Lannister, like, Jaime, you should take care of this. And Jaime, being just the elegant knight of the Kingsguard that he is, like, okay. So he pushes this little boy out of a window to essentially kill this little boy. However, despite the fact that he pushed this boy out of a 5-story, 4-story, I don't know, however tall this tower is, window. The boy actually miraculously survives, but Bran Stark loses the ability to walk ever again. He loses his legs, so he's forever a paraplegic from the very beginning of the book to the rest of the series. So yeah, Bran Stark catches these two in the act. Everyone is worried. The Starks are worried. They're like, oh no, my poor Bran, how did he fall from a castle? Like, Cersei, do you know anything about this? And Cersei's like, I don't know anything about this. Jaime, do you know anything about this? Jaime's like, I don't know anything about this. So everyone's worried. But essentially the big thing that happens here, the two big things that happen here within the town of Winterfell are that Robert Baratheon, because he lost Jon Arryn, his former hand of the king, he then asks Ned Stark that honor. It's like, Ned, my boy, Ned, my previous friend, will you be my hand to the king? And Ned Stark obviously knew this was going to happen. At first, he was hesitant. Then he was like, well, maybe I should, be the hand of the king. But Catelyn was like, hey, you haven't seen this man in forever. The Robert Baratheon you once knew, he's probably a different person. So he's hesitant about going because his wife is, has a reason here. It's like, oh, this man isn't who you think it was. But then Eddard and Catelyn receive a letter by Raven, because all written communication is sent not via email, but through Raven mail, through Crow mail, as a Raven coming from Catelyn Stark's younger sister, Lysa Arryn, warns the Starks of the fact that Jon Arryn may not have just died of natural causes, but he was murdered. And so this obviously alarms both Catelyn and Ned. And so Ned, wanting to get to the bottom of Jon Arryn's potential murder, decides, you know what, I have to go to King's Landing, despite the fact that, I didn't want to go. I need to go to King's Landing to find out what really happened to my former guardian. So and then the second thing so the first thing is that Ned Stark has a conversation about, wanting to be the hand of the king. And the second thing is obviously them, Ned and Catelyn finding out about Jon Arryn's death being a murder. So Ned Stark, knowing that there's no other choice but to be hand of the king in order to get a little bit closer to King's Landing and find the potential murder culprit for whoever decided to kill Jon Arryn, decides to take his daughters Sansa and Arya with him to King's Landing and accompany Robert Baratheon, Cersei, and all this, Robert and this ugly crew of misfits. Except Myrcella and Tommen. Those are good people. I love Myrcella and Tommen. But during this time in Winterfell, Jon Snow, who is the bastard son of Ned Stark, decides that he doesn't want to be a bastard son anymore. He wants to make a name for himself. Catelyn obviously is not a big fan of Jon because it reminds her of Ned Stark's previous infidelity. So not wanting anything to do with him, and Jon clearly realizing that Catelyn doesn't really like him and also wanting to make a name for himself, decides to join up with Benjen Stark, who is Ned Stark's younger brother, who was visiting Winterfell during this giant kingly reunion party. And Jon decides to tag along with Benjen to return back to the Wall and essentially say an oath and join the Night's Watch. So Jon Snow ventures north of the Wall with Benjen Stark, and he goes up to the Wall as Ned Stark and Sansa and Arya join up with the Lannister crew, and they go down to King's Landing. Oh, and Tyrion also is like, hey, you know what? I want to go to the Wall because I want to piss from the Wall because I've never been that high up, and what not better way to christen this my adventure in the Wall than by pissing from the side of the Wall out into the snowy ground below. So he also accompanies Jon and goes to the Wall just to hang out. So yeah, we have this crew of characters who make their way back to King's Landing. Oh, and there's so many things that happen within this book. I need to. This is going to be a long video, guys. I'm so sorry. Also, throughout this book, we are introduced to a couple of direwolf pups. Direwolf is the sigil of the Starks, the Stark family, and so each of the 5 Stark children and Jon Snow, who has a snow white direwolf, they find 6 direwolf pups, and they each go to one of the Stark children. So Jon Snow keeps the white direwolf pup named Ghost. Robb Stark takes a gray wolf, Greywind. The other direwolf pups are gray. Takes Greywind. Sansa takes her direwolf pup Lady. Arya takes her direwolf pup Nymeria. Bran takes his direwolf pup shoot, what's his direwolf pup name? He takes a direwolf pup. I forget the direwolf pup's name. Again, I'm basing this off of memory, and I haven't read this book in 3 years, so apologies. And Tommen takes his direwolf pup, Shaggy Dog. So yeah, they each have a direwolf pup. Those will become important and relevant later on in the series. But anyway, all this to say, along their adventure down to King's Landing, Arya protecting Joffrey gets a little callous here and decides to threaten this butcher boy, this just little boy who had nothing to do with anything. Arya defends this boy from Joffrey and sicks her direwolf pup on Joffrey and injures Joffrey. Cersei is super pissed off. She's like, oh, something has to be done about this, like kill the direwolf pup or something like that. But Arya's direwolf pup is nowhere to be found. So Ned Stark, deciding to do the right thing, well, the honorable thing, not the right thing, but the honorable thing, is like, well, I want to keep the peace here, so I'm going to behead a direwolf pup, and the only direwolf pup that's available is Sansa's, despite the fact that Sansa's pup didn't do anything. And by the way, Sansa also defended Joffrey because she's in love with Joffrey, and she's been promised to be betrothed to Joffrey Baratheon once they come of age, so that when one day Joffrey becomes king, Sansa will become queen. And Sansa thinks that's very romantic, so she defends Joffrey despite the fact that Joffrey's a piece of garbage. Arya's like telling the truth, like, no, that's not true. You know, Joffrey was an idiot. So Ned Stark is like, I'm sorry, Sansa, I'm gonna have to kill your direwolf pup, and he kills the direwolf pup, and it's really sad. And Joffrey Baratheon is a cruel, callous person. So anyway, they all go down to King's Landing, where Ned Stark meets this crew of people, and Ned Stark begins to investigate what potentially could have happened down with Jon Arryn's death. So again, about 50 to 60% of this book takes place within King's Landing. This murder mystery where Ned Stark tries to decipher who potentially may have murdered Jon Arryn. A good portion of this book is dedicated to Ned Stark trying to find out what happened, why Jon Arryn may have been killed, and basically asking these three schlubs, especially down here. It's like, hey, do you three know anything about this? And these three being people who essentially have their own secret agendas, their own motivations, kind of give Ned Stark some half-truths, some half-lies, kind of leading Ned Stark around. So Ned is essentially, trying to get to the bottom of things. So again, throughout the events of the book, we spend time in King's Landing. All the while in the east, Daenerys Targaryen has been betrothed to a man named Khal Drogo in an effort to win over his Khalasar, essentially his army. His army of Dothraki riders, Dothraki being a couple of just big, strong, burly people who ride horses and who could win battles because they're very big, strong, and good horsemen. And Viserys Targaryen wants these hordes of Dothraki people because it could help him win back the Iron Throne that was lost when their Mad King father, Aerys Targaryen, lost the Iron Throne all those years ago. Now, Viserys Targaryen is not a very nice man. He just wants Daenerys Targaryen. He doesn't care if Daenerys Targaryen gets sexually assaulted by people who are clearly above age and she's underage. He just wants his Dothraki army. That's all he cares for. And throughout this time, she also meets a man named Jorah Mormont, who's a man from Westeros, who was secretly sent by Robert Baratheon to spy on Daenerys Targaryen, because Robert Baratheon actually hates the Targaryens. He didn't just kill Rhaegar Targaryen to win the Iron Throne. He didn't even want the Iron Throne. He killed Rhaegar Targaryen because Robert Baratheon 15 years ago was betrothed to Ned Stark's sister, known as Lyanna Stark. And Rhaegar essentially kidnapped Lyanna, and Robert was super pissed off, and that started a war. So Robert Baratheon was like, hey, you Targaryens, how dare you do this? So that started this war, and it went crazy. And so Robert Baratheon essentially hates all Targaryens. So because of that, he sent out Jorah Mormont as a spy to kind of spy on Daenerys Targaryen and report back to Robert Baratheon of her wandering so that he can keep tabs on her and make sure that she doesn't cause a ruckus. He actually wants her dead, but, can't have everything you want. So Daenerys Targaryen gets married to Khal Drogo, despite the fact that she's underage, and she gets her cherry popped when this 13-year-old girl gets assaulted by this, despite the fact that they're married, she essentially gets assaulted by this man, and she cries, and Viserys Targaryen is like, haha, I'll have my army soon enough. And yeah, it's really, really sad, really, really depressing. So they kind of move around, these four individuals move around Essos quite a bit. So they just kind of wander around Essos, Daenerys gets married to Khal Drogo. Viserys does get his Khalasar, but Khal Drogo doesn't. But the Khalasar don't really follow anyone. They don't really promise the Khalasar to Viserys because they're just kind of like, they give gifts. They don't do exchanges or trades. They just give gifts whenever they want. And despite the fact that this marriage happened, they haven't given the gift of the Dothraki army to Viserys Targaryen quite yet. So they're over here. Lots of stuff happens with them. And then at some point here in this, later on in the series, Bran Stark, he's bedridden. He's off in bed. He can't use his legs. He actually gets attacked by some would-be assassin carrying a Valyrian steel knife. And again, Valyrian steel is this really sharp material that can cut through anything. Cut through butter, cut through toast, cut through anything you want. Cut through human necks. Spoilers and foreshadowing. So this would-be assassin enters in the middle of the night to try to kill Bran. Catelyn happens to be there, despite the fact that this would-be assassin not anticipating that. Bran's direwolf essentially mauls this would-be assassin, and they save Bran. So Catelyn is very worried about what happened here, what happened with Bran Stark, and how he was potentially almost murdered. So she decides to go take a ship and go south to King's Landing to report to Ned of what happened. So at some point also, Jon Snow says his oaths. He decides to be a Night's Watchman. However, Benjen Stark goes missing as he goes foraging north of the Wall. And Jon wants to find where Benjen is. However, he is told by the current commander of Castle Black, the current commander of the Night's Watch, Jorah Mormont, who is the father of Jorah Mormont. I know a lot of these names sound very similar. No, it's a fool's quest. Benjen Stark is missing. It's foolish to go hunting in after him. You should stay here. And Jon is like, no, I want to go foraging. I want to go after him. And so, yeah, a lot of teenage angst. Tyrion, after having some heart-to-heart conversations with Jon, he decides to migrate back down south to Winterfell. He says a little hello to Robb Stark, gives him the idea for Bran to be in a wheelchair, and Tyrion decides to further venture south. Tyrion is kind of our traveling character throughout this first book, this first Game of Thrones book. So these four stay at Winterfell: Robb Stark, Bran Stark, who's a paraplegic, Rickon Stark, and Theon Greyjoy, and then Tyrion Lannister kind of just goes adventuring on his own adventures. Jon, and by the way, when Jon is in the Wall, he meets Samwell Tarly, totally not inspired by Samwise Gamgee for the Lord of the Rings. Ha ha ha! I see what you did there, George R. R. Martin. And so yeah. Anyway, as all this is going on, Catelyn Stark tells Ned Stark, like, "Oh, our baby boy was almost murdered. What are we gonna do?" And so Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, always having a secret agenda, being mischievous, he's like, "Oh, that Valyrian steel dagger could have been a dagger. I believe it was my dagger. It was won from me in a bet that I lost to Tyrion Lannister." And so Catelyn is like, "Oh, Tyrion Lannister did this?" And Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, is like, yeah, Tyrion Lannister totally is the one who decided to send this would-be assassin to kill your son. She's like, "Oh, how could he?" And so she then leaves Ned Stark and decides to head north. So to head back to Winterfell. And so Ned is like, "Oh, thank you, Littlefinger, for being so wonderful to me and my wife." And Littlefinger's like, yeah, sure, whatever you say. Like, "Oh, I was unwise to mistrust you." It's like, "Oh, mistrusting me was the wisest thing you did ever since you got here." Wink, wink, foreshadowing. That happens there. As Catelyn Stark travels north, she runs into Tyrion Lannister, who happens to be traveling south. Oh, what are the odds of that? They meet at an inn called the Crossroads. Catelyn Stark accuses Tyrion Lannister of murdering Bran. Tyrion is like, "What the heck are you smoking? I had nothing to do with this." Like, "Oh, Littlefinger said you did." It's like, Littlefinger lied. Like, why would Littlefinger lie to me? Because that's what he does. Littlefinger lies and mischievous and has secret agendas. And so Catelyn is like, "I don't believe you." So at a Crossroads Inn, she decides to essentially arrest Tyrion Lannister with the help of a lot of northern and river folk, with the help of a lot of river folk that are currently just having some coffee, having some beer, some alcohol, whatever it is that they're drinking there at the Crossroads Inn, to arrest Tyrion Lannister. And so Catelyn takes Tyrion not back to Winterfell, as Tyrion was imagining, like, "Oh, Tywin Lannister will free me. He knows you're headed to Winterfell," but instead takes him to the Eyrie. And he's like, "Oh." It's like, Catelyn thought, it was like, "What? You thought I was taking you to Winterfell? You think I'm kind of some stupid fool? That's a trap." And Tyrion's all sad. But anyway, Catelyn runs into Lysa Arryn. Catelyn is like, Lysa, you told me that John Aaron was murdered. It's like, so you would stay away, not get involved. What the hell are you doing trying to investigate this? I told you he was murdered so that you stay away. We also get a look into how crazy she is. Lysa Aaron is one crazy kooky lady, some crazy kooky sister. And then we also meet Bronn, who is kind of just a sellsword knight who befriends Tyrion Lannister. Lysa Arryn also accuses Tyrion of a bunch of stuff. Tyrion decides to defend his honor with a trial by combat, which is essentially just this way of deciding if someone is guilty or innocent. You have someone represent you in battle, and the opposing party also has someone represent them in battle, and the two duke it out in a duel, and the person who manages to kill the other person wins whatever verdict. So Tyrion picks Bronn to be his champion, the person who will represent him in this duel, this trial by combat. And Lysa's would-be defender dies, and so Tyrion's like, I've won my freedom. So he takes Bronn with him out of the Eyrie, and Catelyn slaps Lysa for being a crazy kooky lady. How dare you? Like, what the heck? What are you doing? You're absolutely insane. You've done nothing to help out this cause. Blah blah blah. I'm going back to Winterfell. Anyway. As during this entire process of Catelyn having kidnapped Tyrion, Tywin, being pissed off that like, oh, they took my son, he decides to start a war. So he sends out a man called the Mountain, the Mountain who rides Gregor Clegane, to basically pillage the Riverlands and burn lands, and essentially as retribution for Catelyn Stark taking Tyrion Lannister. Now, Tywin Lannister, who is the father of Tyrion, Cersei, and Jaime, he doesn't give a crap about Tyrion Lannister. He gives a mild crap about Jaime, but he doesn't give a crap about Tyrion Lannister. But he just wanted an excuse to pillage and burn lands and take more of the piece of the Westerosi pie for the Lannisters themselves. So he uses Tyrion's capture as an excuse to have the Mountain that rides to do that. So Tywin Lannister is kind of just in the Riverlands, somewhere here. I believe he's at the Green Fork. There we go. He goes to the Green Fork and kind of makes camp there within the Riverlands. So then at some point, Ned Stark catches wind of this whole thing going on. Also, at some point, Jaime Lannister is pissed off that Tyrion was taken by Catelyn as word reaches. Is no longer Catelyn's prisoner, but previous to this, Jaime caught wind that Catelyn took Tyrion as prisoner. He's not too happy with the Starks and decides to have his Kingsguard folk kill Eddard Stark's men-at-arms, and then they badly injure Ned Stark. He had actually a horse falls on him and he injures his leg. So Ned Stark is limping about, and Jaime is like, "This isn't the end. This isn't the end, Ned Stark. Like, I will have my brother back." So then Jaime goes north to also kind of take part in the shenanigans of the war. So while all this is going on, Robb Stark up at Winterfell is catching wind of all these things that are going on and decides to entrust the Winterfell castle to Maester Luwin, the maester that kind of watches the guardian of Winterfell, to Maester Luwin and to Bran. He's like, Bran, you'll be the Lord of Winterfell for the time being. I need to go to the Riverlands and have a few words with this Tywin Lannister for burning and pillaging stuff. And Bran is like, oh, but I'm just a little boy. It's like, you'll do well, Bran Stark. I am your older brother, and I will always be here for you. Foreshadowing. So Robb Stark goes south to deal with the Riverlands, and then he winds up south. I don't know. He's here somewhere. And then while all this is going on, also Bran Stark at one point while he's out foraging, Bran and Rickon, they get happened upon by a couple of wildlings. The direwolf pups of Bran and Rickon, and I believe Theon as well takes care. Well, Theon doesn't have a direwolf pup, but Theon manages to subdue and kill these wildlings, except for this wildling lady named Osha, who decides to be a protector for Bran. So she kind of comes into the fold as a protector for Bran and Rickon, and decides to stay within the castle walls of Winterfell. Anyway, sorry, I know I'm moving around so much here. There's a lot to narrate, guys. Thanks for bearing with me. By the way, while you're here, like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy. So as all this is going on, Tyrion meets up with and his new pal Bronn meet up with Tywin. Jaime at some point also met up with Tywin, and Tywin sends Jaime to Riverrun to essentially take it over, which he does with his Lannister forces. Tyrion and Bronn meet up with Tywin, and Tyrion is like, oh, like, you do care about me, father. You started a war for me. And Tywin is like, I don't give a crap about you, son. Like, oh, good to see you too, father. And Tywin is like, I'm a stern, evil man. I'm the stern, evil man of these first 3 books. And Tyrion is like, yep, we all knew that from the very beginning, you stern, evil man, you. So they participate in this battle known as the Battle of the Green Fork as Robb Stark, who actually, Catelyn meets up. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of order. Again, I'm basing this off of memory. Catelyn meets up with Robb Stark, and they're like, oh, it's good to see you, son. What are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm going to the Riverlands to help protect us, but we need more men, and we also need to cross the twins here. And Catelyn is like, oh, you need to cross the twins. That means you need to speak to the late Lord Frey. And it's like, who's the late Lord Frey? And Walder Frey is this man who, in the war, the war against the Targaryens 15 years ago, only decided to join in the war when it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that the Targaryens were going to lose. And Walder Frey was like, actually, I'm on the Starks and Baratheon side. I've been on their side all along. Yay! Like, I love the Starks, and I love the Tullys, and I love the Baratheons, and oh, the Lannisters joined. Yep, I've been with you guys all along. So he decided to join the war a little too late when it was a foregone conclusion that they would win. So Catelyn warns Robb that Walder Frey is a surly old man and he won't let them cross unless they provide payment. And Robb is like, what kind of payment does he want? So Catelyn goes to meet with Walder Frey, and Walder's a surly man, and he's like, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, look, your son wants to go through. Ho, ho. Like, are you trying to threaten me with that little army? I could just easily, not do anything and send word to the Lannisters, and Tywin's army will be here and kill your stupid army, and blah, blah, blah. And Catelyn is like, whoa, what if I, Robb Stark, what if I marry off Robb Stark to one of your daughters? And Walder Frey is like, ooh, do tell. It's like, all right, fine, whatever. Yes, I will have a piece of this northern pie via Robb Stark, and I'll give you my army, but only if Robb Stark is betrothed to my Frey daughter. And Catelyn's like, sure, Robb Stark would never break that oath. Never, never. So yeah, Robb and Catelyn are allowed to cross the twins and allowed to take a couple of 20,000, I believe 20,000 Frey forces. I don't remember the exact number, but they're allowed to take quite a few Frey forces and allowed to cross the twins along with their northern and river forces. And so Robb Stark then devises a scheme to fool Tywin Lannister into believing that he's sending out most of his army to deal with Tywin. So Tywin is like, oh, they're sending out their whole army. We got to meet them head on. But what he's actually doing is he's sending out only a small army of 2,000 men to take on Tywin Lannister, while he, Catelyn, and his other 18,000 men, along with his wolf, Grey Wind, decide to take on Riverrun. So Tywin, Tyrion, and Bronn participate in this battle called the Battle of the Green Fork. The Mountain is also involved. It's a pretty good battle, pretty well narrated battle. It's rather unfortunate that this event didn't get adapted into the Game of Thrones TV show, but it's a great battle. The Lannister forces win. They think they've won the whole battle, but it turns out that like, oh, what the heck? They only sent out it's only a few people that we beat. Where are the other 18,000 men? Well, the other 18,000 men actually took Jaime Lannister by surprise as they take back Riverrun and take Jaime Lannister as prisoner. Tywin has lost his favorite son. And Tyrion is like, oh, I'm right here, Dad. It's like, I've lost my favorite son. Oh, but I'm right here, Dad. I lost my favorite son. So Jaime Lannister is under arrest. Robb and Catelyn appear to have won the day, and they're all staying at Riverrun. Back to the events of King's Landing. And again, thanks for bearing with me, guys. I know I've been all over the place with this summary. Ned Stark, finally having learned through kind of a lot of just kind of winking and nudging by Littlefinger, it's like, hey, you should check out this white book. And seeing that this book essentially that details all the previous kings of Westeros and what they look like, their physical appearance, and realizing that Joffrey Baratheon actually bears more of a resemblance to Jaime, less so than to Robert Baratheon, decides to confront Cersei Lannister with this news. And Cersei pretty much openly admits it, like, yeah, Joffrey Baratheon is my son. So is Myrcella and Tommen. They're my children. They're the children of Jaime and I. Jaime and I are very close. We're closer than brother and sister. And it is like, gross. That's disgusting. So Cersei's like, what are you going to do about it? It's like, well, Ned is like, I'm going to tell Robert Baratheon. And Cersei is like, wow, you're announcing your plans to me? That's very stupid of you, Ned Stark. It's like, I'm honorable. I want to give you advance notice so that you can take the children and run away from here. And because, Robert's wrath will follow you everywhere. And Cersei's like, what about my wrath? And Ned doesn't realize that this woman is capable of such wrath. But Ned is like, no, like, I'm too kind and you're too kind and you'll just take your children and get out of here because Robert will be pissed off. Well, Eddard Stark is like, because Ned then tells like, oh, the rightful heir is Stannis Baratheon because your children are illegitimate. So Stannis Baratheon, the one true king, the great Stannis Baratheon, my lord, my king, my liege, I would follow you to the end, Stannis Baratheon. Stannis, I love you. Is like, Stannis, he's the one true king. He should be king. So he tells Littlefinger, it's like, Littlefinger, like, Peter Baelish, Cersei's children are illegitimate. And Littlefinger is like, oh, do tell. Oh, I had no idea this was the case. So Eddard is like, Littlefinger, I need your help. Cersei's men are enough to overwhelm me. We need to take Cersei prisoner if she doesn't run away. And it's like, all right, whatever you say, Ned Stark. So when Peter Baelish and Ned Stark go to the Red Keep to arrest Cersei Lannister with the help of the City Watch, who was under Littlefinger's salary pay structure, the City Watch betrays Ned Stark, kills all of Ned Stark's men, and takes Ned Stark prisoner. And Littlefinger, in the show, he's like, oh, I told you not to trust me. But in the book, he has like a sad smile. He's like, I told you not to trust me. Why did you trust me, Ned Stark? Oh, Peter Baelish, I want to strangle your neck. But anyway, Ned Stark is betrayed. Cersei Lannister considers it treason because I skipped over this part and I'm sorry. So when Ned Stark had told Cersei Lannister of the fact that he was aware that when he learned that Cersei's children were illegitimate, instead of running away, she actually had her nephew hand Robert Baratheon, the king, while he was on a hunt, had handed him a bottle of wine so that he could try to take on a boar. He's like, oh, I can take the world. I can take on anything. So he hands him some alcohol to dull his senses. And he's like, yeah, I can take on a boar too. And of course, the boar tears right through Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon is on his dying breath. He tells Ned Stark in his will that he wants Joffrey Baratheon to inherit the throne. Eddard Stark decides to write that, despite the fact that he knows it's wrong. And Robert Baratheon sadly dies. So then Ned Stark gets betrayed by Cersei Lannister. And then Ned Stark is under arrest. He's in the Black Cells. And then Varys, who's been kind of been the wild card throughout this entire series, is like, what sort of idiocy compelled you to tell Cersei Lannister that her children were illegitimate? And so Ned is then aware, like, oh, this is an open secret. Everybody knows. So Varys essentially pleads with Ned Stark to tell Ned to essentially tell his son, like, withdraw your forces. Let's come together, like, make a Lannister Stark agreement, and I'll put this behind us and just have peace. And Ned is like, I don't want that. Like, the Lannisters are fools, and they did all this stuff. It's like, well, what about your children? What about Sansa? What about Arya? And Ned is like, oh. And also throughout the commotion, Arya managed to escape the Red Keep, and she's kind of just wandering around King's Landing. But anyway, so Ned Stark decides to take Varys' advice, and he goes in front of Queen Cersei Lannister and in front of the new king, Joffrey Baratheon, to essentially say, like, hey, yes, like, I committed this treasonous act of trying to go against the king, Joffrey Baratheon, despite the fact that that's not true. He was just trying to, look out for the inheritance, knowing that Joffrey Baratheon is actually illegitimate, but he decided to do this for the well-being of his daughters, Sansa and Arya. And Joffrey is like, you know what, Ned Stark? You're all right. Thanks for telling me the truth. Also, you're sentenced to death. Bye! And we hit this horrible climactic moment within the book. This horrible moment that tore my heart to pieces, where Ned Stark is killed by someone who doesn't carry out the sentence, but instead sends out his lapdog, Sir Ilan Payne, to take out Ice, this long Valyrian steel sword that was formerly Ned Stark's, and chop Ned Stark's head off. And it's really sad, and it's really impactful, and I hate Joffrey Baratheon for it, and we all hated Joffrey Baratheon for it. And Sansa cries, and we're all sad, and Joffrey just takes in the adulation and the applause of the people because they think that this would-be traitor was killed. And it's horrible. And it's this wonderful moment, this wonderfully horrible moment within this book that definitely alerts us to the fact that George R.R. Martin is a writer of not necessarily killing off characters for the sake of killing them off, but of subverting expectations. we're introduced to this character who we believe is the main character, this typical fantasy protagonist, this good guy doing honorable things who just wants to do right by everyone. And rather than him getting out at the last second and being able to use his honor to avenge anybody or escape anything, he gets killed off. And it's really sad and it's really horrible, but it's indicative of George R. R. Martin's writing style. He wanted to subvert your expectations, but subvert your expectations in an intelligent way, because George R. R. Martin didn't just kill Ned Stark for shock value. He wrote the story with the intention of killing off Ned Stark because he had plans for what would happen after Ned Stark's death. And that is the sign of a good writer, someone who doesn't just kill someone willy-nilly because, you know, it's for shock factor, but someone who does something, who kills a character because it's part of the plan, it's part of the overall story. And it gives the future events of the story more gravitas, because we now know that, like, anybody can die, anything can happen. There are real stakes within this story. So it's this sad, horrible moment, and we all hate Joffrey for it. So Sansa is like, how could you do this, Joffrey? How could you do this? And Joffrey was like, I thought you were going to be merciful. It's like, I was merciful. I gave him a clean death. So Sansa's like super pissed off. She's finally kind of learning, you know, throughout this whole book, she's kind of been this naive person that's believed the good in everybody, believed the good in King Joffrey, or formerly Prince Joffrey. And now she sees the ugly truth. She sees this psychotic boy for who he actually is. She sees this world as not this wonderful, beautiful, colorful song, this pretty song of rainbows and butterflies, but this dark and dirty and disgusting world. And it's a harsh lesson to learn. So at one point, when Joffrey Baratheon is taunting Sansa with Ned Stark's head, taunting Sansa with the head of the septa that came along with them, who he had killed as well, Sansa sees an opportunity to potentially push Joffrey off a bridge and kill him. And as she approaches Joffrey to kill him, the Hound steps in and takes over and is like, oh, and makes it look as if like Sansa was just, you know, wandering about. So the Hound takes hold of Sansa, Joffrey, and you know, Sansa's now betrothed to this horrible man, and Joffrey is like, oh, like, you better be like a good girl from this point forward. And so Sansa is just stuck in this city with this horrible person. Arya, she witnessed the events of this, of the murder of her father. She also hates Joffrey. She hates the Lannisters. She gets taken in by Yoren, a man of the Night's Watch, a man who came from the Wall down to King's Landing in order to ask for more men to come with him back to the Wall to help man the Wall and join the Night's Watch. He takes hold of Arya. In the show, they do this cleverly. They have Ned Stark signal to Yoren that Arya was right there at the statue of Baelor. But in the book, Yoren just kind of happens upon Arya. He grabs Arya, tells her not to look when Ned Stark is executed, and then takes her with him with the intention of like, all right, I'm going to cut your hair off, make you look like a boy. You're going to be a boy. You're going to be Arya from this point forward. Don't say you're Arya. Don't say anything. Otherwise, like, people are going to know who you are. They're going to catch wind of who you are, and it's going to be horrible, and you're going to be executed, and you're going to be killed because people are looking for you. So Ari, the new boy Ari, goes with Yoren, and he in this point is going to go on an adventure towards the Night's Watch. Well, Yoren has the intention of dropping her off at Winterfell on the way back to the Wall, but yeah, she's now been separated. She's also learned, she was a little bit less naive than Sansa about the darkness that exists within the world, but obviously she's a little girl, and having witnessed this horrible event, she's traumatized. So yeah, she has no choice but to tag along with Yoren. So Renly Baratheon, prior to all these events, he is like, he had told Ned Stark, like, Ned, you should take the children. Ned's like, I'm going to tell Cersei about this. Like, Ned, you're a fool. So Renly decides to run away to Highgarden, where he immediately marries Marjorie Tyrell. The Tyrell family is Lord of the Reach, and then Renly decides to name himself king. All the while, Stannis, never appearing in this book, but already having kind of foreknowledge of Cersei Lannister's illegitimate children, also names himself, and I'll have a portrait for Stannis here when we narrate the next book, when we summarize the next book, also decides to name himself King of Westeros, because he's the eldest Baratheon son after the death of Robert Baratheon, and the fact that Cersei's children are not Baratheons. He's like, yep, I should be next in line. I'm the new king. And he's right. He is the one true king. And yeah, so everyone is everyone is sad. Catelyn is sad. Robb is sad. In the show, they include this very powerful scene, which is not in the books. The first season of the TV show is probably the only season that I think is near perfection. It's the best season of the TV show. It's great. It adapts the book in a way where it adds and emphasizes events from the book and gives them more gravitas, as opposed to later seasons, which deviate from the book, which there's nothing wrong with deviating from the book, but it deviates in a way where it kind of detracts, kind of subtracts from the powerful events that happen in the book and just kind of makes them a little bit more lame. But the first season is so good. It's so good. In the first season of the TV show, they include the scene that's not in the book where Robb Stark is just hitting a tree with his sword, very sad and depressed over the death of his father, and Catelyn comforts Robb and is like, "Oh, like Robb, you've broken your sword," and Robb and Catelyn embrace, and it's very wonderful mother-son moment. So anyway, those are pretty much all the events that happen within a Game of Thrones within Westeros. And Jon Snow comes to learn. I barely talked about Jon Snow. Jon Snow doesn't... this might be a hot take, but Jon Snow is one of my least favorite characters in the series. I just don't find him as interesting as the other characters. But at one point, Jon Snow comes to learn that Ned Stark is going to die. That Ned Stark was dead. He's like, "Oh, I hate them so much." So he wants to run away south of the wall to ditch the Night's Watch. And then Sam is like, no, come back to the Watch. It's like, you swore an oath. And it's like, forget the oaths. Like, F the Lannisters. I hate them all. I'm going to join my brother Robb and kill these Lannisters. And Sam manages to convince Jon to come right back. And then Jon meets the Maester of the Wall. Jon comes to find out that the Maester is Aemon Targaryen, who was at one point going to be king. And Aemon Targaryen tells him, like, "Jon, like, my grandson was killed. His son was killed, and the children were killed and murdered. And despite all that, despite how horrible and how heartbreaking it was when all the Targaryens were essentially eliminated in this horrible war, I stayed here at the Wall. I'm not telling you to stay, or I'm not telling you that you shouldn't go, but consider this, that love is the death of honor and duty, and I stayed here despite that." And so Jon is kind of taken aback by Aemon Targaryen, and he decides to stay at the Wall. Also, at one point, they come in contact with the others. The others attack the office where Jorah Mormont was staying. Jon Snow, thinking quickly, uses a sword and puts it on fire and manages to kill the others. And Jorah Mormont is like, "Oh, the others, they're real, they're coming." So Jon Snow, Sam, and Jorah Mormont decide to venture north of the Wall to search for Benjen Stark and also to find out what's going on with all these others. So that's pretty much all the events that happen in Westeros throughout this book.
So that's actually not true, as I missed a couple of key events when I originally recorded this video that are important for A Clash of Kings. One, Barristan Selmy, the most famous member of the Kingsguard, is actually relieved of his duties as a Kingsguard. However, instead of venturing off to a plot of land set aside for his retirement, Barristan instead throws his sword at Joffrey's feet and swears him off as he leaves King's Landing to head off to parts unknown. And two, Tywin leaves the Riverlands towards Harrenhal, but not before naming Tyrion Lannister as Joffrey's Hand of the King in his stead. This pretty much confirming to Tyrion that Tywin believes Jaime is as good as dead within the hands of the Riverfolk, and Tyrion is now his one true beloved son. Okay, back to the video.
Which leads me to Essos, which we've barely talked about, because if you couldn't already tell, the events that happen in Essos aren't exactly my favorite events. Every time I read it, like whenever I'm reading the first Game of Thrones book, I'm like, oh, I'm so invested in the story, the murder mystery involving Jon Arryn. I'm so invested in, Robb Stark, doing this battle and Tyrion Lannister and all the things he's doing. I'm so invested in all these things. And then every so often we cut back to a Daenerys chapter and her events are just so far removed from Westeros. And I'm like, oh, it's such a, I don't know, it just pumps the brakes on the story. And every time I had to switch back to a Daenerys plotline, I just didn't care. Anyway, at some point, the Dothraki, Alysar gets sick and tired of Viserys because he's like, "Oh, where's my army? Where's my army? I want my golden crown." And so Khal Drogo is like, "Oh, here's your golden crown." So he melts a bunch of gold, pours it over Viserys' head. Viserys immediately dies from the heat of the gold and he gets killed off, which leaves Daenerys and Khal Drogo together. And then Khal Drogo at some point gets bitten by a bug. Khal Drogo falls ill. He falls off his horse. He's essentially just kind of a paralyzed person. Daenerys comes in contact with this witch, Miri Mazdur. She asks her to heal Khal Drogo, but Khal Drogo is essentially a mute. This also, like all this witchcraft, also scares off the entire Dothraki. And so they all run away from this witchcraft and leave Daenerys, Khal Drogo, Jorah Mormont, and a couple of just Dothraki people here just by themselves. So I think they're in Lazarine, or maybe they're in the Red Waste. At some point, Daenerys is really sad. She kind of developed the Stockholm syndrome where, you know, despite the fact that she was forced into this marriage against her will, she kind of falls in love. Well, George R. R. Martin has a weird way of writing this, but Daenerys falls in love with Khal Drogo, and Khal Drogo turns out to be this mute. She really cares. She wanted to save Khal Drogo. Mir Mazdur does this magic, and Khal Drogo survives, but he's essentially just a useless shell of a man. So Daenerys realizes that Mir Mazdur had intentionally just made Khal Drogo a shell of a man. She also made it so that Daenerys cannot birth any more children. Daenerys is like, why did you do this? It's like, oh, the Khalasar sexually assaulted and murdered all my people. Why would I help you all of a sudden? So Daenerys, fed up with this, he's like, I'm sorry, Khal Drogo, and decides to put Khal Drogo out of his misery, suffocates him with a pillow. Khal Drogo dies, and so then she burns a pyre, burning her now deceased husband, Khal Drogo, and also burning Mir Mazdur to a pyre. Mir Mazdur dies, but something I forgot about, and I'm sorry, I keep forgetting all these elements. Daenerys, at one point, whenever she got married to Khal Drogo at the beginning of the book, she was given these dragon eggs by Illyrio, the person who was housing both her and Viserys at the beginning of the book. And when they were being housed, she was given these dragon eggs. These dragon eggs never hatched. They were just kind of like, oh, don't expect these dragon eggs to hatch. They're just useless eggs. She put them on this pyre, but because of Daenerys sacrificing her baby, her kids, Daenerys sacrificing Khal Drogo, and Daenerys sacrificing Mir Mazdur to this pyre, Daenerys walks into this pyre that's on fire. Jorah Mormont is like, no, what are you doing? Stop, whatever you're doing. Daenerys walks into the pyre. She doesn't get burned because a Targaryen doesn't get burned by fire, and she survives the fire. But not only that, most importantly of all, these useless dragon eggs that Daenerys was given at the very beginning of the book, these useless dragon eggs that have been with Daenerys this entire book, they hatch into little dragon babies. And Daenerys, being naked, having her clothes all burned off, Jorah Mormont approaches Daenerys, and she sees this naked Daenerys Targaryen with 3 baby dragons. After 150 years, after so many, actually, not 150 years, but after like more than 100 years of there not being a dragon within the land, within anywhere in the planet of Planetos, we finally have 3 dragons brought into the world, and Jorah Mormont can't believe it. And the few remaining Dothraki writers can't believe it. So they kneel to Daenerys as their mother. And that is where a Game of Thrones ends. Whew! Oh boy. That was a long one, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for bearing with me throughout this entire summary video. That was a lot longer than I anticipated, but I hope you guys enjoyed this summary of A Game of Thrones. I'll be back in a couple of days to summarize the events of A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, also A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. I'm contemplating kind of combining A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons into one video. We'll see what I wind up doing there, but yeah, that was A Game of Thrones. What did you guys think? What do you guys think of this story? What do you guys think of my summary of these events? Definitely let me know down in the comment section down below. Thanks for sticking around with me, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you guys for a summary of A Clash of Kings. Until next time, the Advocate, out.